A Course in Miracles, Questions and Answers. What is the cost of inner conflict? Based on A Course in Miracles teachings. Meditation context. Keeping your attention on or in your body will keep you in the present moment. All guilt, regret, resentment, and anger is based on the past. All worry, anxiety, and fear is centered on some point in the future. In the present moment, none of that fear-based negativity exists. The Course in Miracles text is 1,754 pages long, and the main premise is nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. Each of my meditation videos will all have from 7 to 10 A Course in Miracles quotations, and after each quotation I will have a short meditation. Here is the first Course in Miracles quotation. Quotation: Fear is a dream and has no will that can conflict with yours. Conflict is sleep and peace awakening. Death is illusion, life eternal truth. A Course in Miracles. We're going to use the 4-7-8 method. The 4-7-8 breathing technique involves breathing in for 4 seconds, holding the breath for 7 seconds, and then exhaling for 8 seconds. In breath. Hold. Out breath. Quotation: Life not in heaven is impossible, and what is not in heaven is not anywhere. Outside of heaven, only the conflict of illusion stands, senseless, impossible, and beyond all reason, and yet perceived as an eternal barrier to heaven. Illusions are but forms. Their content is never true. A Course in Miracles. In breath. Hold. Out breath. Quotation: The ego always tries to preserve conflict. It is very ingenious in devising ways that seem to diminish conflict because it does not want you to find conflict so intolerable that you will insist on giving it up. The ego therefore tries to persuade you that it can free you of conflict, lest you give the ego up and free yourself. A Course in Miracles. In breath. Hold. Out breath. Quotation: The ego uses the body to conspire against your mind, and because the ego realizes that its enemy can end them both merely by recognizing they are not part of you, they join in the attack together. A Course in Miracles. In breath. Hold. Out breath. Quotation. The ego will attack your motives as soon as they become clearly out of accord with its perception of you. This is when it will shift abruptly from suspiciousness to viciousness, since its uncertainty is increased. Of course, in miracles. In breath. Hold. Out breath. Quotation. The ego believes in atonement through attack, being fully committed to the insane notion that attack is salvation. And you who cherish guilt must also believe it, for how else but by identifying with the ego could you hold dear what you do not want? Of course, in miracles. In breath. Hold. Out breath. Quotation. Either God or the ego is insane. If you will examine the evidence on both sides fairly, you will realize this must be true. Of course, in miracles. In breath. Hold. Out breath. Quotation. Here is the end of choice. For here we come to a decision to accept ourselves as God created us. There is no conflict that does not entail the simple question, what am I? Uncertainty about what you must be is self-deception on a scale so vast, its magnitude can hardly be conceived. Who is the doubter? What is it he doubts? Of course, in miracles. In breath. Hold. Out breath. Quotation. The only way in which the ego allows the fear of hell to be experienced is to bring hell here, but always as a foretaste of the future. Hell is only what the ego has made of the present. Of course, in miracles. In breath. Hold. Out breath. The question posed at the beginning of this meditation in this video was, what is the cost of inner conflict? And the quotations that best elaborate on this will be shown here now. The text that I highlighted in green says, conflict is sleep. This quotation seems to be saying that to be conflicted is to remain asleep in a dream. Again, the question posed at the beginning of this meditation in this video was, what is the cost of inner conflict? And the text that I highlighted in green says, outside of heaven, Only the conflict of illusion stands, senseless, impossible, and beyond all reason, and yet perceived as an eternal barrier to heaven. This quotation seems to imply that, first of all, the conflict of illusion is senseless, impossible, and beyond all reason. Secondly, it says that the conflict of illusion is perceived as an eternal barrier to heaven. Again, the question posed at the beginning of this meditation in this video was, what is the cost of inner conflict? And the text that I highlighted in green says, the ego always tries to preserve conflict. It is very ingenious in devising ways that seem to diminish conflict because it does not want you to find conflict so intolerable that you will insist on giving it up. The ego therefore tries to persuade you that it can free you of conflict, lest you give the ego up and free yourself. This quotation seems to be saying that one goal of the ego is to keep you in conflict, so much so that it devises ingenious ways that seem to diminish conflict, but that instead perpetuate it. It implies that the ego wants you to believe that it can free you of conflict. Otherwise, if you knew its real agenda, you would give up the ego and free yourself instead. Space Eternity Meditation. We're going to take an imaginary trip with your consciousness, and during this imaginary trip, we'll leave your body behind. To begin, see yourself standing in a large grass field. You've been given the ability to travel into space and to go anywhere you like. You don't have to worry about oxygen, collisions, or anything else, because only your consciousness will be traveling into space. You now have the intention and decide to go straight up into the sky. You are now flying up into the clouds. You then decide to pause and take a look around. You look down and see cities, streets, towns, and hills. Now you have the intention and decide to continue flying straight up. You are now in outer space, and it's mostly darkness with lights from stars and distant planets. You then slow down, pause to a standstill, and take a look around. At this point, you decide to go straight ahead in a horizontal direction. Meteors, planets, and other phenomena are racing by you. You then slow down, pause to a standstill, and take a look around. You again decide to continue in the same direction. You continue, and you have now traveled a significant distance while moving extremely fast. You then think to yourself, when will I reach the end of this universe or of this solar system? How will I know when I've gone as far as I can possibly go? You then realize that either there is an upcoming wall of some sort, or space just continues on. And you think to yourself, if there is some sort of a wall ahead of me, what about straight above me? Is there some sort of a wall there too? And what about straight below me and behind me? Is this universe or solar system contained in some sort of a box? Is outer space confined by a box with walls? And if so, what is behind the walls of this box? You think to yourself, if outer space is confined by a box, and I go through one of the walls of the box into outer space again, then when does that space end? Is there another box enclosing the box that I just exited from? You then realize that the only thing that makes sense is that there are no walls or boxes in outer space, that space just keeps on going endlessly for an infinite distance. You realize that infinity is the only thing that makes sense when it comes to outer space. Okay, we're going to do a timelessness meditation. And again, take long, slow, deep breaths, but very relaxed. Don't make an effort of it. Okay, we're going to take a look at time now. To begin, see yourself standing on a long, almost endless sandy beach. You hear a loud, gentle, kind voice, and it says, each grain of sand on this beach is equal to a 100-year lifetime. And there are millions of beaches just like this one, with trillions of grains of sand on each one. How many lifetimes do you think you have? You have an infinite number of lifetimes for all of eternity. As you breathe in, see your consciousness diving down into a grain of sand. As you dive down into it, you see that everything is large, and you see that it resembles planet Earth. There are oceans and mountains and vegetations within this grain of sand that you just took a dive into. You keep diving down into the single grain of sand and feel as though you've been there before. It starts to look very familiar. You then realize that you will be starting a new life there, an entire new lifetime from birth to death. And you remember what you were told, that each grain of sand is equivalent to one lifetime, and that there are millions of beaches with trillions of grains of sand on each beach. You begin to sense what timelessness is. You begin to understand how time can just keep going on and continue endlessly, just like outer space. You realize that you are not the body that you see, that you instead are the spirit that surrounds the body. You remember that you've been told that you are energy, and that energy cannot be created or destroyed. You realize that you are an infinite being living in a timeless universe with no end. The body is just a costume.